Hello, and welcome to the Bamboo Lab podcast with your host, Peak Performance Coach Brian Bosley. Are you stuck on the hamster wheel of life, spinning and spinning, but not really moving forward? Are you ready to jump off and soar? Are you finally ready to sculpt your life? If so, you've landed in the right place. This podcast is created and broadcast just for you, all of you strivers, thrivers, and survivors out there. If you'd like to learn more about Brian and the Bamboo Lab, feel free to reach out to explore your true peak level at www.bamboolab3.com.
Welcome, everyone, to this week's episode of the Bamboo Lab podcast. As always, I am your host, Brian Bosley. And I want to start off today, before we bring on our amazing guest, I want to read a heart letter that came in, I believe, last week. And it was actually an interesting one because it came from one of my former guests that I interviewed. I won't share the name, but this person said, "Good morning, Brian. When we did the podcast together last fall, I had no idea that my daughter's partner would take his life a few weeks later on Thanksgiving. I needed to go back and listen to the podcast to hear my own words to help us through these hard times. Again, thank you for giving me the platform." I just want to say that one gave me goosebumps when I read it, and it gave me goosebumps as I just reread it again. And so honored that we are able to, in some small way, help this guest, this individual and her family to get through a very challenging time. So please know that we're all with you at all times. All right, today we're going to get started because we have a guest on here who is very busy and has limited time today. So I'm going to read his bio, and he probably won't like me reading it because he's not a big self-promoting kind of guy, but I'm going to promote him. We have Dr. Fred Luskin on here today. Dr. Luskin has completed extensive research on the training and measurement of forgiveness therapy. His research demonstrates that learning forgiveness leads to increased physical vitality, hope, greater self-efficacy, enhanced optimism, and conflict resolution skills. It also shows that forgiveness lessens the physical and emotional toll of stress and decreases hurt, anger, depression, and blood pressure. Ooh, we all need that. He has worked with men and women from both sides of the violence in Northern Ireland who have lost family members, who have had family members killed. And he's also worked with a lot of different people in the financial industry after the stock market crash of 2000. He is the author of a book I'm holding in my hand, the bestseller Forgive for Good, a proven prescription for health and happiness. He has worked with this multitude of organizations. He's trained attorneys, doctors, church leaders and congregations, hospital staff, teachers, and a lot of other professionals to help them manage stress and enhance forgiveness all over the United States and beyond. His work has been featured in Time Magazine, in Oprah's magazine O, Ladies' Home Journal, U.S. News and World Reports, Parade, Prevention, as well as the New York Times, Los Angeles Times, Chicago Tribune, USA Today, and the Wall Street Journal. He is the director of Stanford University's Forgiveness Project, as well as a professor at the university. And he also serves as the co-chair of the Garden of Forgiveness Project at Ground Zero in Manhattan. My new friend, Dr. Fred Luskin, welcome to the Bamboo Lab podcast.
Thank you.
You are so welcome. So everybody out there in the Bamboo Pack, you might remember back in episode number 73, February 20th, we interviewed an amazing man by the name of Art DeLorenzo. And that podcast just soared. It has done extremely well across the world. And Art, after the podcast, said, "You've got to get my colleague and my friend Fred Luskin on here." I'm like, "Yeah, man, if he'll come on." So Fred and I had an opportunity to talk. I believe it was March 3rd of this year on a Friday afternoon. We talked for close to an hour, and I'm like, man, what an amazing human being. So I know for me, forgiveness has been a challenge, and I didn't realize that until that conversation with Art DeLorenzo, and then my conversation that followed with Dr. Luskin. And I started looking back and say, have I really forgiven people? After going through his book, as well as watching so many YouTube videos on Dr. Luskin, I realized I don't really think I'm good at it. And so it's an honor to have on here. So, Dr. Luskin, can you start us off by telling us a little bit about the Forgiveness Project that you started and co-founded and direct at Stanford University?
Sure. I struggled with forgiveness, and I was very badly hurt by someone, and I figured at some point when I was really in the depths because somebody had abandoned me I knew that this was not trivial, and I knew that I didn't know how to deal with it. And I had to figure something out, and there were very, very few psychological, tangible resources about forgiveness. There was stuff in the, Christian world and maybe some of the more spiritual worlds, but there was very little in the psychological or the empirical world. And so I don't even know what the word is. I gritted my way through a very difficult experience, came out the other end. I guess you could say I forgave that person, but I more recognized how to soothe myself and not take it so personally, and so I could let it go. Because of that experience, and then starting to look at my training as a therapist, I saw that there was literally nothing in the therapeutic world on forgiveness, which seemed pretty shocking to me. Because, it's like the last step on the train, okay, you get over some stuff, but you got to let it go. And so when it came time for me to do my dissertation study, I figured, well, I'll try to help other people with what I couldn't do. And I had a very gracious dissertation chair at that time who didn't demand that I do something established, but allowed me to take a risk. And so I did a small dissertation study on forgiving stuff, and took all comers, and whoever had a problem with anything was fine. And that study proved successful, and we got a grant not shortly after to replicate and expand it. And then because I was at Stanford, the media found out about these novel kind of things, and my work got out into the public, and which gave me opportunities to interact with people in different experiences and both learn more about forgiveness, but recognize even more deeply the need for it. Like this just arching ache that human beings have to figure out a way to get over the pain that they have without having to pay that pain forward. That's the nub of what I've learned about forgiveness.
Well, the thing I have, I until I started looking into your works, I thought that I had forgiven, and I know I've talked about this quite a bit on the podcast and various episodes, Fred. I was hurt as a very young child by a extended family member, and when I was 5 years old. And I just kept saying, after probably in my mid to late 20s, early 30s, I would just say, I forgive you, I forgive him. He had passed long before that. And one of the things I did is I wrote a letter to this individual, and I went into the building where this abuse would happen, and I went into the specific room, actually, and I took a big pan, and I burned the letter, literally burned it in a pan, as it kind of saying, okay, this is me giving this letter to you, how you hurt me and how you affected me, and what it's done so far to my life, good or bad, or what, but I forgive you. And I always thought that was forgiveness. Like, I thought, okay, I forgave him. And I've told people I've forgiven the perpetrator, but in retrospect, I look back on my life now, and I don't think I really did. And so I guess a really good question for me to want to know, and I'm sure the audience out there is asking too, is what is forgiveness, and then also what is not forgiveness?
When you talk about you being 5, a 5-year-old needs adult guidance. A 5-year-old can't really conceptualize what forgiveness is because they operate so concretely. It's tangible and practical. They need adults to help them put it into context that, there are some things that other people simply shouldn't do. And that's true and that right wrong needs to be cultivated. And it's not either or, it's and you need to learn over time how to handle things that you believe are wrong. So it's not that you give up your idea of right and wrong. It's that you evolve and grow in what you do with ideas that are right and wrong. And that's an evolutionary maturity. It's not something a 5-year-old can do. But saying I forgive them is practice. And there's some research that's one of the values of religious coping, is it gives you a practice in positive things. It gives you like a first step, even if you don't fully understand what you're doing, you're practicing that direction, and it can lead to deeper conditions. Forgiveness is a very conscious, deep willingness to suffer what life brings, because it's going to bring suffering. I mean, there's no way around that. And to feel that suffering and not run from it, and also not stay in blame for it. So running and blaming are two of the normal ways that human beings deal with suffering, and they're both helpful short term, but then they become unhelpful long term. And forgiveness is that transition from normal grief, which is the brain's reorganization around difficulty and change and loss. And the brain has to go through that, the brain, the nervous system. The problem is often we get stuck there, so that we continue to blame others for months, years. We align with our tribes or groups and create enemies with whom we continue to blame or criticize for lifetimes. But forgiveness is holding that pain, recognizing that pain, recognizing that what happened is wrong, and then not letting it dominate us and not letting it create in us this sense of I'm a victim. And so the story then changes. The forgiveness is the change of story from I'm a wounded victim to I was a wounded victim, and here's what I learned, and here's how I've grown, and here it is what I'm moving ahead towards. That transition is forgiveness, so you're not looking backward at the offense primarily. You're looking forward as to how it is you're going to live your life that includes that offense. And it's a very powerful, deep process that is not easy, and is but in no means like kumbaya or, all things are good. It's a gritty depth of character that allows one to, deal with life's adversity, which life has plenty of.
Bear with me for just a minute here. That was, I think what you said there, Fred, was what I got out of it personally. And I've never considered, well, obviously when I was younger, I did, probably until I started getting therapeutic help and doing a lot of reading and studying on abuse and childhood abuse. And I was in my early 20s, and a lot of journaling and things like that. That's when I stopped seeing myself as a victim. But I don't think I've ever said to myself, and I have thought about, but I can tell I've still carried it. I always use the term, when I was young, I wrote a poem when I was in college, a poem about what happened when I was 5. And I don't remember the exact poem. I do have it in my safe, actually, which is odd 30 years later. But it was about, from that moment, I never felt I could run between the raindrops any longer. that I felt every raindrop in the world, versus before, when I was a child, before this happened, I could run through the raindrops. Life was glorious and life was fun. It was glamorous, and it was, I was nobody could harm me. Then all of a sudden, and I really thought I had dissipated a lot of that childhood victimhood mentality. And then really in the last 2 weeks, since I've been just researching a lot of your work, I really don't think I have said, I was a wounded victim at one time, but now looking now on what I've learned through the process, and now where am I going? Obviously you still carry some of that with you through memory and through baggage to some degree, but maybe trying to lessen some of that baggage every day or throughout the process, letting some of that drops, but focusing. I think I've been focusing still after 50 years after this happened, still looking backward versus now looking forward more and more and more. And I think that has been an anchor.
There are so many ways that, we as humans have choices as to what we do with either people who hurt us, people who don't do what they want, what we want them to. I remember, and this is related to the unbelievable political discord that we have now, in all the ways that we've divided into like red and blue, almost tribes. But I remember coming home one time when I was a kid, and I didn't like I remember probably 11th grade English teacher. And she was, I grew up in, so I was in high school at the early 70s, and the Vietnam War was raging. And I remember coming home and telling my mother that, the English class that I was taking was ridiculous. I could be sent to Vietnam in a year, and she's talking about Pride and Prejudice, and it was a complete waste of my time. And my mother looked at me and said, yeah, that makes total sense. And you're going to have to figure out how to get along in a world with people who don't do what you want. Like, she just said that to me, like, yeah, you're right. And it's not the end of the world being right. You got to learn to adapt. And I just read an article today in today's Times that, there was that incident at Stanford Law School where a very conservative judge was shouted down by very liberal students. And this op-ed columnist was talking about that and talking about how we now live in a culture where I think she reported that over 50% of like single Democrats would not date a Republican, and like 30-something% of Republicans would not date a Democrat. And I think like we are embedding unforgiveness culturally, that it is becoming almost a badge of honor that if they do something or believe something that I don't agree with, I'm exiting them from my heart. And that's what unforgiveness does. It takes the offense and like embeds it, and then makes the people who did it, or the people we think who did it, bad people. Mm-hmm. And it's a very challenging thing that's being codified culturally, and it's an unmental health experience. Like I can't put that any more strongly. We are teaching our young people and each other things that do not contribute to their mental health.
Well, Dr. Luskin, I always think that when you look at the political realm of society, I've always shared with my family and friends, the pendulum always kind of swings back to the middle. And we have extreme behaviors on one side, we have extreme behaviors, and then that kind of settles in the middle. It doesn't seem that it's settling any at this time. It seems like it goes from one to the other, then one to the other, and nobody seems to be swinging letting that pendulum kind of just settle in the middle and let it tick-tock back and forth like a grandfather clock instead of swinging wildly. Do you think that's still a possibility for our society to get there, where the pendulum can kind of rest somewhere peacefully in the middle?
The answer, of course, is yes, it's possible. But it requires some understanding of what people want. And there's always been floating around like the mental health world. Do you want to be happy or do you want to be right? And those are often challenging orthogonals. Sometimes they're not, but they're often challenging orthogonals. How much do I have to insist that I'm right? Because if I have to insist that I'm right, then you need to be wrong. And happiness probably has more to do with shifting, a little bit of shifting opinions, some humility about one's views, and even looking back and recognizing, I was right a good number of times, but unfortunately I was wrong a good number of times. It's an inner flexibility and it's a group flexibility that is probably the most useful. And it's like if you look at successful marriages, long-term intimate partnerships, usually there's some flexibility in, I'm going to say, who's holding the stress or who's being the giver taker. Like there are times in a relationship where one person is just more on top of their life, so they're giving more, they're more gracious, and the other person is sucking their thumb and, whatever. But if that becomes permanent, then the relationship struggles. If it's seen as, it doesn't have to be equal every second, but things come and go, that's a flexibility. If you see that my partner brings both skills and challenges that I don't have, and some of them will be irritating, but some of them will be growth producing. It's this somehow a lessening of this striking need that humans have to be right and make things that either they don't agree with or hurt them into wrongs. And I think that's underneath what it is you're asking.
Yeah. I think the depth that you share here is obviously far further than my research that I've done. I understand human behavior quite well overall. And one of the things I really loved what you said, and I don't even know where I got this. It was in the last couple of weeks. Talking about you said something that forgiveness, kind of a couple of definitions of forgiveness you shared in some research, or maybe it was a YouTube video I was watching where you were speaking. One of them is giving up all hope for a better past.
Yeah.
And the other one was making peace with the word no, where something didn't go quite your way. You can either fight that no, or you can make peace with it. And I thought, man, it's so simple. But why is it not easy?
That's the best. I didn't create that. And I think it was created by a woman I know about 30 years ago who had her daughter murdered. And that's what she came up with. Forgiveness is giving up all hope for a better past. Look at the maturity in that. Mm-hmm. That I got the life that I got. And right now, how much do I want to spend arguing about the life that I had? And again, that's the kind of question that I don't believe we're taught enough to ask. Like right now, today, you've had life experiences. How much do you want to spend arguing and fighting them now? Like the war is over, it's like, if your mother's 87, if she didn't do something right to you when you were 13, it's like, okay, 50 years has passed or whatever. There's only a war if we want one to be. And so forgiveness is giving up that hope that somehow the past could be different than it was. And it's a very childlike way of looking at something. And I don't think it makes happy people.
I see that all around me every day. So why is it so difficult to forgive? What are these obstacles that I think everybody would agree, at least most of us would agree, that forgiveness is healthy. What's the big obstacle that we face? Is it pride, ego?
Well, forgiveness and revenge. They're both templates in our nervous system. I mean, we come into this physical life with them imprinted. So they're laid down as parts of our choice system. Just like everything else, the key driver is, with what intelligence do you choose which template to bring to bear on a situation? So we have a template for anger, we have a template for sadness, we have a template for joy, we have a template for intimacy and compassion. They're all wired in. The question is, what do you want to practice? Where do you want to bring your attention so that you highlight certain aspects that are wired into your nature? The Dalai Lama wrote in his book, The Art of Happiness, in order to be happy, you have to practice the conditions that create happiness. In order to be unhappy, you have to practice the conditions that create unhappiness. So if somebody is attacking your child in front of you, and you didn't choose that moment to be angry or maybe even exact some revenge on them to stop it, then you wouldn't have used your intelligence well. If somebody harms your kid and then 5 years later you're angry and thinking about revenge, you haven't used your intelligence well. These are all innate parts of our being. The reason forgiveness is so difficult is we don't practice. It's there. But if somebody cuts us off on the freeway, that's a great moment to practice forgiveness because it doesn't harm anybody. If your partner makes a mistake or doesn't say the right thing, that's a great moment to practice forgiveness because nothing happened. You have to practice these templates that are laid down there in order to bring them into conscious use. And we don't do this, and we don't teach our kids enough to do this. The ones that are most available to us are the protective ones, the anger and the fear. Those are the simplest biological things that are hardwired to be available to everybody because they are so basic. That is something that we don't recognize enough, how wired for negativity we are. But we don't take the opportunities to practice the skills that we're going to need when things happen. So again, if your partner does something wrong and you've practiced appreciation of them and forgiveness, then you will have primed that pump to put forgiveness clearly on your menu. You may also need anger at that point to let them know that this is not trivial, that this is something that really matters to you. But it's the practice that we minimize when the experiences come.
Okay, so it sounds like the practice, I mean, obviously it's very difficult to forgive some grand hurt that somebody caused you as a child or even as an adult, but we can get there eventually. But we have to practice some of those smaller those more obvious, like somebody cuts us off in traffic, our spouse says something that irritates us, or
Of course.
practice those and develop that, I guess, that skill set to some degree. Then eventually move on to some of the bigger things that we want to forgive. Is that kind of what I'm hearing?
Well, I'm going to tell you the most important practice for forgiveness is gratitude.
Okay. I was going to ask you about that.
That once you see beauty in this world, once you see beauty in the people around you, once you start paying attention to how much you're given, it becomes much harder to be unforgiving, because you have created an appropriate balance in your own mind about your life, what your life actually is. So the simplest example that I think of, and I've tried to practice myself when I can, is you wake up in the morning and you think to yourself, how many things I have to do? I have this long list, and I got to do this, and I got to do that, and there's all this pressure and all this stuff. And that's fine. But like the simplest reminder is, okay, I woke up and I'm in a bed, in a home. So that's good. There's running water where I live. There's food in the refrigerator. I have transportation. All of a sudden, you're now seeing your life more clearly. It's the lack of seeing our lives clearly that is the biggest predisposition to unforgiveness. Because we highlight the negative and minimize the positive, we create conditions for taking what we have for granted and not using that as, let's say, ballast to handle. So again, with somebody you care for, if they're late, but they do 900 things well, you can learn to absorb their being late. I mean, it doesn't mean you don't bark at them, but you don't hold this bitter grudge against them. And that's life's challenge. It's not just forgiving, like, when you were 5, you were harmed, or my friend who hurt me, or I had a mother-in-law who was quite challenging. It's not the biggies just so much. It's our daily relationship to our life. Are we forgiving people is the deeper question.
Well, you said something about the gratitude. And I remember, I'm going to say it was 6 weeks ago, Fred. I do a lot of a thing called rucking, which is just hiking with a really heavy weighted vest on. And it's just, you either put sand or lead plates in this vest and you hike. And I was doing it all winter long in fairly deep snow, maybe 6 inches. And it, obviously it's crusty, so it's hard walking and it's painful. And I sweat and I stink when I'm done. And I have to drive 15 minutes to go to the trailhead to get there every day. And there were several days where I said, I have to go hiking today. I've got to go rucking today. And finally it clicked and I said, no, you don't have to go. You get to go. You have the opportunity to go. You can walk. You're getting stronger. You have healthy lungs. You have a car to take you there. You can afford gas to get to the trailhead. And, you have a music to listen to while you're walking. And it changed my entire paradigm of I have to do it to I get to do it. And I think that's a form of gratitude. It was my way of showing myself that I'm grateful for something that before I kind of dreaded because it's painful, physically painful. What do you think about having these, a lot of people do, and I do it myself, is I write every morning. I have a gratitude journal that when I wake up, usually at 5 o'clock in the morning, I'm writing in my journal several things that at that moment that I'm just grateful for. Sometimes it's something very big, like my grandson said grandpa for the first time last week. That went in there. Sometimes it's the fact that my dogs laying on my lap and feel safe around me. So, so it's whatever I feel thankful for. I have noticed that little exercise every day. Now I'm noticing things in my life more that I didn't notice before. Birds chirping, a sunny day, the fact that my mom and I call or text we talk every single day on the phone. And I wonder, to me, that was a way that I started developing these little gratitude exercises and practice. Now I'm seeing the bigger things in life. Do you think the gratitude journal is a helpful tool?
You bring up two separate things to me. One is the existential statement of I choose, that I don't have to do much. I choose. I choose to be here. I choose to not be there. I choose to be married. I choose to not be married. I choose to go to work. The existentialists and the Stoics are the best illustrators of the fact that we lie to ourselves when we say we have to. That it's not true. You don't have to do anything. But we choose. I mean, to be alive, you probably have to eat and drink and whatever. But beyond that, you don't have to. And so their existentialists refer to that as bad faith. That you're basically making shit up. And the truth is you have more choice than you would ever recognize. And that's a wonderful thing. So I would remind people who would tell me how awful their partner was and that they have to go home and see them. And I'd say, you don't have to go home. You never have to see this person again if you don't want to. It's up to you. Like that, that's fine. Don't go home. It's like, this is your deal. Like with parents who were harsh when they were children, like I tell them, like, it's up to you. Choose. But once you choose, own that choice. Like, I'm here because I want to, not because I have to. We're saying the same thing. I'm just bringing in a much deeper philosophical tradition. The other part of that is the gratitude that comes when you make that choice of, well, I had a choice all along. I didn't have to come home. I didn't have to do anything. I chose to. And now I'm free if I want to, because I'm not making up all these burdens to appreciate what I have. And Albert Schweitzer's definition of happiness is the best one that I had heard. It's happiness is wanting what you have. And that is, again, as you're saying, everything is simple, but it's not easy. That's the tag of it's all simple, but not easy.
I love the word I choose to rather than I get to. I really like that, because to me, choose is an action, where get is still, I get it. I get to do it. But a choice is, if I choose to go hiking on a hot or a cold day or a hot day when I don't want to go, it shows that I have control, I have choices, and it's an action word for me. And that really resonates extremely well for me when I know that there's an action involved, that I chose the action. What would you say, Dr. Luskin, is the gratitude is very important in forgiveness? What about humility? Is humility a big factor in forgiveness?
Is what?
Humility, being humble?
Even more important for gratitude is humility than forgiveness. One of the great misunderstandings about gratitude is how humility is the core of it. And the researchers who look at gratitude try to distinguish it from most of what passes for gratitude now. So like Facebook and LinkedIn, most of that is not gratitude. It's pride. It's arrogance, it's self-promotion when they say, I'm so grateful that I won this or all this other stuff. Gratitude is a humble reflection that good things happen outside of my agency. It's a humble understanding that there's so much good that I contributed nothing towards. And real gratitude is full-hearted appreciation of whatever it was that offered itself to you. So if your partner is kind, gratitude isn't, well, I put in 10 years with them, they should do the same, or, it's good that we have a reciprocal relationship. Gratitude is this human being, from their free will, chose to be kind. That's not something I can ever repay or take for granted or even understand. In a long-term marriage, the gratitude is even that I'm such a jerk, that the closer you get to me, the more you recognize what a jerk I am. And this remarkable human being chooses me every single day out of their good-heartedness. So gratitude is the foundation of gratitude is humility. It doesn't exist without humility. Towards forgiveness, the humility is, I'm not the center of the universe. Painful things happen to every single human being who exists on this planet. The Buddhists have pointed out that everything changes, that we're impermanent. So there's suffering built in. They refer to the three harbingers of truth as old age, sickness, and death. That this life is built on a foundation of challenge. Unforgiveness makes believe that challenge is unique and personal. That it happened to me, therefore it's worse than what happens to everybody else, or that it's unique. And the holding on to it, the holding on to the hurt, is because one can't have the humility or the tolerance to accept that this is part of this experience. And that is the nub of it. When you go from just taking it personally to taking it personally and seeing it's a normal human experience. It's not either or. It's not like you just go, oh man, that's just your karma or kumbaya. That's taking it too impersonally. Forgiveness comes from that deep maturity of, yes, it's personal and it's not. That this is part of being human and it happened to me. So I have a story about it, but I can release it because the human part of me has grieved it, and I can release it into the just, this is what we go through here. And so the wise is it requires both an attention to our own drama and an acceptance of the bigger forces.
I think the humility aspect has always, probably when I really dissect it now, has been a bigger challenge for me than gratitude. And I really like that, hey, this did happen, and it may not have been good, but other people have gone through it too, as well. Some people even more challenging than I have. And I'm not a one-man island where, the world needs to cater to me because I went through some challenging aspect of my life. I know your schedule is busy. We only have a few more minutes. I want to ask one more question, because I think that, Dr. Luskin, so many people find comfort in not forgiving. They find comfort in anger or revenge, primarily probably because that's what they've been accustomed to, and they have found they've built their camp and their home on being unforgiving and being angry and revengeful. What is the real benefit, and why is it so helpful to be a forgiving person and to begin to forgive people around us and even people from our past?
I mean, again, it's a deeper question. Many of us were not raised by competent parents. We didn't see modeled in our home mature ways of dealing with life. Many people were raised by alcoholics or substance abusers or people with anger problems or depressed, who they themselves did not have the skills to navigate through life. So it is very difficult to develop emotional maturity. It is very difficult. And the experience of anger gives one a false sense of power. So in that way, it can also lead to a kind of dopamine rush and addiction. At least I'm feeling something. And at least I'm making believe I'm doing something when I'm actually doing nothing. But at least I can pretend that I'm doing something. So there's that pseudo satisfaction of anger instead of actually solving the problem. The other pseudo satisfaction is victim status. It's not my fault. It's not my, it's poor me for having suffered, rather than, wow, look at me as I show growth and maturity. Taking responsibility for our life is a very difficult point of emotional maturity. And a lot of us simply were never taught to, never modeled it, and couldn't see the reason for developing it. So we make stops along the way of being pissed off or full of self-pity, because those at least give us some hook to have social currency to say, I'm pissed off, or poor me, and maybe we can get some of our social needs met that way.
I think what you said is anger gives people a false sense of power and a release of dopamine. I see that, and I'm trying to dissect myself and not others right now. And I'm looking at, shit, I've got a lot of work to do, Fred. I've got a lot of work to do. So as I go on this journey, and we all go on this journey of practicing forgiveness, what would you expect over time would be some of the benefits we would recognize and we would see in our own lives, besides more gratitude, humility, appreciation? Is there, obviously it sounds like if even physically it manifests in our bodies, the art of practicing forgiveness. Any other major things you would see that we would notice more than likely as we practice this art of forgiveness?
I'm going to say the one thing I want to add before we're done is that I would like to highlight is Desmond Tutu's book title, and the essence of his life's work was, without forgiveness, there is no future. Mm. And what that means is, without forgiving, you're still litigating the past. And so when we're litigating the past, we don't allow the future to emerge. We bring the past in, and we cripple ourselves and we cripple our cultures. But we also then decide what our agenda is. Is our agenda to write the past or create a new future? And that, to me, is the most important aspect of why forgiveness is a critical issue and why it will not go away. That human beings tend to too much bring their past into their present and contaminate their present with their unhealed past. That's the danger of unforgiveness. We bring it into our relationships. We bring it into our politics. It's without forgiveness, there is no future. And if I was going to leave your audience with something, that's what I would like to leave them with.
I think that's an incredible way to leave. And I know you have to leave, Dr. Luskin. I do want to say I know that you've met Desmond Tutu yourself, and but you had never met Nelson Mandela, you said. And it was so interesting. I had heard that a few days ago somewhere, read it, watched a YouTube video. And today, as my Facebook memories popped up, maybe it was 2 years ago, I had put a quote by Nelson Mandela, and it fits so much to what we're talking about today. This is from Nelson Mandela. He said, when we dehumanize and demonize our opponents, we abandon the possibility of peacefully resolving our differences. When we dehumanize and demonize our opponents, we abandon the possibility of peacefully resolving our differences. And I thought, that popped up this morning on a post that I had placed 2 or 3 years ago on Facebook, and here we're talking today about something very similar. So this was amazing, Fred. Thank you so much for taking the time. I know you have to go, so you can feel free to hang up. I'll wrap up with the audience, and I'll be in touch with you sometime in the next couple of days, and we'll go from there.
Thank you so much, Brian. I enjoyed the conversation. Hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and we will speak again.
Thank you, Fred. Take care. I appreciate you very much. Bye-bye. Well, ladies and gentlemen of the Bamboo Pack, that was Dr. Fred Luskin from Stanford University. He's got a tight schedule, so he had to wrap up. He only had until 9 o'clock Pacific time this morning, or 10 o'clock, I'm sorry. So anyway, I hope you got a lot out of that podcast episode. I took... 3 full pages of notes as he was speaking. I'm going to recommend you reach out. I'll include a link to his book, Forgive for Good. He's got several other books out as well. I would recommend just Google Dr. Fred Luskin. You'll see multiple YouTube videos. He does not like to talk about his videos. He does not like to self-promote. He's a very humble, gracious man, but he's got a lot out there, and I've learned so much from watching some of his videos over the past couple of weeks. So please get out there and explore him. I recommend purchasing this book. It's amazing. I haven't had a chance to go through the entire thing yet because I'm reading another book at the same time, but I've gone through the highlights. Groundbreaking, man. This is life-changing. It has literally been life-changing for me these past couple of weeks, primarily since the first time he and I spoke on March 3rd. So, all right, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. Please smash that like button. Please subscribe, rate, and review us. And more than importantly, please share this with 3 other loved ones. This is a message that can save families, can save countries, communities, and can possibly entirely save the world and lives. So thank you all very much. We'll talk in a few days. In the meantime, get out there and sculpt your life. Get out there and strive to be and give your best. Show love and respect to others, but also to yourself. And please live intentionally. Enjoy every single moment. I appreciate each and every one of you.